All right, good girl. All right, welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the Sunday garden question and answer video that I do most Sundays of the month. Last Sunday was a subscriber Sunday where subscribers send in photos of things in their garden that they're proud of. That video was great. Thank you for participating in that. Also, thank you for asking questions in the last two videos. That's where these questions came from. This past week, I did a video on wood chips and just how wood chips changed this entire landscape and how little fertilizer I use in this landscape just based on the soil improvement I've done by using compost, wood chips, just all kinds of organic material, but mostly wood chips are the main thing out here. There were a lot of questions. That video has been viewed a lot already, and there were a lot of questions within that video. I answered a lot of them. Some of them were just questions like, what's the difference between bark and wood chips? And bark, bark products like my triple shredded hardwood mulch or double shredded hardwood mulch that I use is mostly bark from hardwood trees. If you're using pine bark nuggets or pine bark mini nuggets or pine bark soil conditioner, all of those are bark products. Those are where the lumber industry strips the bark off the trees so they can use the wood for other things. And it'll have some wood in it, but for the most part, it's bark. And the main difference is bark really resists breaking down. That's why it's on the outer protective part of the tree. It really resists breaking down, which makes it great mulch because it lasts longer. It saves you a little bit of money. You don't have to buy it as often. So that's the main difference. Whereas wood chips or arborist chips, that's the entire tree. It's all parts. It's the bark, the wood, the limbs, the leaves, everything, depending on the time of the year. Maybe it had leaves, maybe it didn't. But that's the main difference. And that having all of those parts of the tree together, it really cooks down much faster and really can improve your soil very quickly. I do not use them over and over and over again, nor would I ever use them over and over. If you go back to even videos at the old house before this house, I will rotate different types of mulch that I use, and I will let the mulch break down as much as possible. I'm trying to prevent weeds. On one hand, I'm trying to hold in moisture, but I don't want my mulch to continue just to build up and build up and build up. I don't think that's a good idea in the eastern part of the country where it stays wetter. You can create some boggy conditions and some anaerobic conditions if you just continue to build your mulch up and up and up and up. That landscape job, I've put up 4 parts of a landscape job. The first video I talked about in that video, whoever had been doing maintenance on that place had been putting mulch down twice a year, maybe 4 or 5 inches at the time. The mulch was this thick. It just did get remulched almost a year later, but the mulch was this thick, and it had actually created conditions that were no longer favorable. They had gone a different direction, and that's just, we get a lot more rain here in the east. You might be able to do something different out west where you're getting a little bit less rain, but the whole story here is I let my organic material break down pretty thoroughly, and I will rotate materials. So where I used wood chips on these paths in that video, I'll probably use pine straw next time and just kind of rotate back and forth. I like to do that. I have always found that to be a pretty good technique for allowing things to break down pretty thoroughly. I want them here to prevent weeds, hold in some soil moisture, keep the soil cool or warm, all the benefits of mulch, but I don't want it so thick that I'm burying my plants in it and creating anaerobic conditions, which can happen. Not always, but can happen. Okay, this past week I put up the wood chip video I just talked about, but I also put up a video from Skidaway Island landscape installation. I thought that video was pretty good. Alex was the one, the foreman on that landscape installation. If you haven't seen that, I know it's an almost tropical landscape. It's like, right on the edge where you get to Savannah, from Savannah south into Florida. It really becomes, especially along the coast there, you can really use some almost tropical things, but it's quite beautiful. If you haven't seen that video, videos that are going to be going up this next week are kind of a continuation of where I've been going with this channel a bit, which is you don't have to break the bank to participate. And so I'm going to show off the seed that I've purchased for next spring, my flowers and vegetables, also some seed collecting that I'll be doing in the next couple of months out here in the landscape. Plus I'm going to start my fall vegetable seed I'm going to do a video on all the top annuals that I did from seed this year, and perennials as well. And so, and one other, there's one other in there too, but they're all related to, you can have lots and lots of color and just do these things from seed and not break the bank and spend $4 and $5 on a single annual or something like that. So if you want to follow along with that this week, those videos will be going up during the next 5 or 6 days. Okay, let's see. The other thing in that wood chip video is I always talk about using that snow shovel or grain shovel, as some people call it. And then there's a lot of comments down at the bottom about it's easier to use a fork for some people. Use a fork. I certainly don't dictate. I wouldn't want to seem like I'm dictating to anyone how to landscape. And so, if a fork works for you better than that shovel, makes total sense to use it. I'm probably physically stronger than a lot of you watching, probably physically weaker than a lot of you watching as well, but somewhere in the middle there, and that shovel works for me best, and it always has, and I've spread more mulch than lots of people in the thousands and thousands and thousands of yards of mulch over the years, and I've always used that shovel as long as it's on a hard surface. But if a fork works better for you, heck, use a fork, do what works for you. Somebody said they neglected to water their peony and it turned brown, wanted to know if it was dead. If you're in the south, my peonies are in the process of going dormant here in middle August. Sometimes they've already gone dormant at this point. So it's within the realm of possibility it was just going dormant. But if it turned crispy earlier in the summer, it may be dead. But I mean, there's no reason to dig it out. No reason to. I mean, if it comes back next spring, it comes back. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I mean, that's life. But again, in the south, they tend to go dormant before fall. In the north, the foliage looks a little better throughout the summer. But you won't know until you know on that one, unfortunately. Somebody asked me the best fertilizer for skip laurels. Well, I only fertilize once a year here on my shrubs that are in the ground, and I just use an organic fertilizer. So whatever organic fertilizer you want to purchase, I would do it sometime about the time they're breaking dormancy next spring, March 15th to June 1st, something like that, depending on where you live. Once you start seeing a little bit of growth on things coming back to life, I would hit them with an organic fertilizer. Keep them mulched. This is the thing about keeping the ground covered. It's the wood chip conversation, the bark conversation, the pine straw conversation, whatever conversation we're having. I'm just going to be saying keep the ground covered, because that stuff will feed them every bit as much as the fertilizer will. So once a season, some sort of organic fertilizer, and the brand doesn't matter. This is all about just soil improvement and letting your soil take care of your plants. Okay, wiring the Japanese maple. I don't know if the Japanese maple's in the frame or not, but I finally planted the Japanese maple that has the contorted trunk on it. You can go back and watch that video from maybe a week and a half ago or so. And people wanted lots of questions about how to wire it. I have some wire, and I'm going to wire another one that's over here. So that's another video you guys will see pretty soon. The best time to do it really is about now, and I'll leave it wired through the winter. And then next spring, once it's leafed out, it will probably be set in whatever shape that I have it in. But you're going to see me wire another Japanese maple. You didn't see that one because the channel didn't exist when I did that one. So that's coming up as well. This was a tough question. Somebody said they have Mexican petunias coming up everywhere, inside their shrubs and everywhere, and they're older and disabled, didn't know what to do about them. I mean, you can't spray, unfortunately, if they're in the middle of something. I mean, a lot of times I might say, I'm all about not using chemicals. You guys know that. But I mean, sometimes there are times where things, spraying makes total sense. But if they're coming up through your other shrubs and things, there's not really anything that you can do about it other than get them pulled out. Unfortunately, I think you're going to have to hire somebody or, get them out. Mexican petunias are annoying. I occasionally see a group of Mexican petunias and I go, wow, they look really great. But the majority of the time I'm seeing Mexican petunias, they're likely not where the person had planted them. They're just all over the place. And especially as you get further south, Here in my area, our winters tend to keep them a little more controlled. But further south, like where I was in Tybee Island this past week, you know, they're just everywhere, and they are a pain. But I hate when I don't. There is no answer to that question other than they have to be pulled. And you know, if you can't do it yourself, unfortunately, I mean, you know, we all need to come to your house and pull your Mexican petunias. That's probably the best answer. I don't know where she was. Somebody, I've seen this question a couple times. I don't know if it was the same person, but asked me about footwear in the garden. I always wore boots when I hardscaped, so some sort of low-cut steel-toed boot, which you can get that look, you know, fashionable basically now. Work shoes that, you know, don't, you know, you don't have to break the bank on them. But anytime I was doing hardscaping, I wore those. Otherwise, I actually, you'll see me with these slip-on Skechers because they don't have laces, and I'm 12 or something, and I don't want to do laces, and so I always wear these Skechers when I'm just out here in general gardening. So if I'm just digging holes, mulching, pulling weeds, pruning, that kind of stuff, I'm just in a most comfortable pair of shoes I can find. If I'm out here moving stone or something like that, I go to a heavier shoe. Or if there's something that can fall on my foot, you know, that's how I determine footwear for the garden. And so back when I was a landscaper, pretty much almost every day we were, you know, moving gravel, moving stone, moving rocks, building walls on machines, backing up trucks toward one another, all those kinds of things. And I would wear some sort of light steel toe or hard-toed shoe. But just in general in my own garden, I'm just using, you know, a shoe that I can slip on and off up near the front door, so I can go move the irrigation around or whatever quickly without tying laces. Because again, I'm like 12. But that's the answer to that. Somebody asked me if I consider going over and if I've gone over and looked at the old house, and I have. For those of you who just maybe subscribed in the last couple of years, the first year of this channel was at my nursery. You know, I had an actual growing nursery, and I'm standing under a shade cloth that I had for a shade area. It was behind my office, you know, and awkwardly talking to a camera about individual plants that I had grown, all those plants that I was holding in all those videos I had grown at my nursery. The second year, it was more at my garden center because my nursery land had been purchased, and I had a garden center. And then the third year is more at the garden center and at my old house. And I was showing kind of the re-landscaping of it. I had been in that house for 20 years, and the landscaping had become overgrown, and I was in the process of re-landscaping that when I decided to move up here to Raleigh. So if catching you up, this project here the last 2 years, you know, so the channel has moved, you know, as I've moved about and changed my profession, honestly, over the last 5 years. I have been to the old house. I've gotten some cuttings from there. I've got a few things rooted from there. The landscape's not in great shape. It's a young couple with young children, and it was unfair to ask anyone to maintain that landscape. And so you know, it's not in the best of shape. But you know, again, they're a young couple. You know, children get older, they might get interested in it, and they can go back out there and tame it a bit at that point. And I'm hoping they do. But if they don't, they don't. You know, it's their life and their garden. Somebody made a comment about having invasive plant warnings on tags. So certain things that are sold would have warnings on them. I think before we got to the point where we put warnings on those tags, those plants probably would be banned before you dictate that they'd put a warning on it. Well, if there's a warning for it, then it should just be banned. We've seen Buddleia banned in the Pacific Northwest, although there's some new butterfly bushes that are, you know, don't produce seed, and so I think they're being allowed back in there. We've seen, you know, barberries in the Northeast because they're so invasive, and there's some euonymus in the Northeast, and plants that are banned in all states. Every state's got a banned list of plants. We haven't banned a lot of them that are just kind of naturalized at this point. So something like Elaeagnus or Japanese ligustrum, Chinese privet, wisteria. I could go on and on. All of those plants are pretty much naturalized, and so there would be no point in banning them at this point. Nobody wants to hear me say that. I love native plants, as much as anyone else, in our native ecosystem, and taking care of our soil and improving our environment. There's no one. I do get the occasional criticism for not talking enough about native plants, but there's a ton of native plants in this landscape. There are a lot of native plants in this landscape, and there'll be more in the future. I love native plants, but most of the damage that was done to our environment with non-natives was done a long time ago when people weren't thinking about this. They brought in Elaeagnus and privets and things from other places, and by the time they had probably gone from Asia to Europe first even, and then came across, and the damage is just done on a lot of them. As a whole, the nursery industry and the states, the government, everybody is much more conscientious about this now. And, going forward, less issues, I'm sure. But again, a lot of these things are just out of the bag. I mean, it won't change anything for me not to plant an Elaeagnus in this landscape. There isn't an Elaeagnus in this landscape. I don't want one. But it wouldn't change anything whether I put one in here or not. There's another 150 in this wooded area behind me, and they're here, and they're here to stay. And they're just naturalized now. So, but I will say I think we've come a long way, and a lot of what you're seeing as you're learning about gardening in terms of invasives was done long ago. And many of your lawn weeds, all gifts from Europe, and they're naturalized. They're here. There's nothing we can do about them. No matter how many chemicals you put down, your crabgrass is here, and your, all of your non-native, grasses are gifts from a lot of gifts from Europe, and they're here to stay. More bad news from Jim. Okay. Let's see. They planted Winterberry hollies in zone 5 in Maine, and they've gotten some leaf scorch on them. They wanted to know if they should move them. They should be fine in the sun in zone 5 in Maine. I think once they go to sleep this winter and wake up next spring, they should do fine. And if you find that they burn a bit next summer, then that would be the time I would move them. They still won't be that anchored in the ground, especially if they've had some stress on them. So you can move them later, but I think they'll be fine when they wake up next year. A lot of times things will leaf scorch because we underwater, or maybe they came out of too much shaded space. I've talked about this many times. I had my plants under a shelter at the farmer's market when I was selling at the Raleigh Farmer's Market. And if they stayed under that shelter for 2 or 3 days, I would imagine when they went to a customer's house and they put them in the full sun, even though it was a full sun thing, they had been out of the sun for several days, and I would imagine they were vulnerable to having that type of leaf scorch. So that's what I'm talking about there. If you take something from a shady space and put it in the full sun, it's not acclimated to it. Somebody has some Agapanthus on their front foundation, and it looks terrible. It's about 5 years old. In Florida, a couple things. Number one, there's a much better Agapanthus now. Agapanthus has come a long way with reblooming varieties that bloom longer. But if they're 5 years old and they're looking ragged, I think they're probably time to dig them up and divide them. We'll see that with a lot of grass-like or lily-like plants. Where the clump gets larger and larger, and eventually it can no longer feed itself well because the clump is so large. It's the one thing in nature it would be competing against other things around it. It wouldn't have that opportunity that we give it in a bed with mulch to just get bigger and bigger and bigger like that. They probably need to be dug up and divided, but I would encourage you probably to look at some new ones because, sometimes it might be easier to find some new Agapanthus that are improved varieties, or find something you like better. But if they look bad, either get rid of them or I think divide them is what you need to do. Somebody asked about pruning snowball viburnum. First of all, there's 3 snowball viburnum, and they're all, there's Japanese. The main one we call snowball viburnum is the Chinese snowball viburnum, Viburnum macrocephalum. And it gets the big, large one, and it becomes a tree and gets large flowers on it. It can bloom in the spring and the fall. Typically would prune that one after it flowers in the spring if you need to prune it. And then there's an Eastern Snowball, which is a smaller growing shrub, which is a little more cold hardy. So if you're up in the north, that tends to be the one that folks have up there. That again, you prune it after it blooms. And then there's a Japanese snowball, Viburnum as well. So snowball viburnum, this is the terrible thing about common names. There are 3 different viburnum that go by snowball viburnum. Chinese snowball viburnum tends to be the one that is the most exaggerated snowball viburnum. All 3 of them you can prune after they flower. Is the best time to do that. Okay, somebody asked me about Angelonia seed collecting. That's one that I will be collecting this fall, but typically around September, October as the flowers fade. They're pretty easy to collect on the Angelonia. I've got 4 or 5 different colors over here, and you'll see that in videos, but they're pretty easy to collect as the flowers fade. Okay, somebody asked me, somebody just made a comment about they used their Sunjo shredder to make compost, and I have one of those in the shed back there, and you're going to see me using that quite a bit as I'm getting some of the things under control here in the landscape. That little it was $120 or something a couple years ago. I don't know what it is now. Everything's gone up so much, but regardless, that little Sunjo chipper is a pretty good little tool. The leaf shredder, and I had shown it on the channel. I have it as well. That thing clogs up a bunch. It's really kind of hard to use. It's almost easier to lay your leaves out on like the driveway and just run over them with the lawnmower and shred them with the lawnmower. I almost advise that. It's just easier if you want to shred your leaves, use a lawnmower. But the chipper works great. I'll link that thing down below. But basically everything I take off these plants, I just run right through it. And I could run it through the composter, or some of the heavier things, I'll just put it out here and just use it as mulch. Whatever comes out of the chipper is just mulch. So, I don't even have to compost it. I call that cold composting. Just compost it in place, as mulch. Let's see. Somebody had some sunshine ligustrum they planted last fall and they haven't grown much. Wanted to know how tall mine is. It's over 6 feet tall, but it's 2 years old. And again, wood chips and the other things that I did to the soil are the reason that thing's 6 foot tall. The fact that you had planted them last fall and they haven't grown a whole lot this first season isn't that big of a deal. I imagine they'll jump out pretty quick next year. But again, make sure the area is mulched and it's weed free, and fertilize them in the late winter, early spring next year. And they should take off. They should take off pretty quickly. This hasn't been the easiest year. I think most people would say that. We had that terrible freeze in March here in my area, and then we kind of went rain free for about 2 months. That was terrible. And then we went blasting crazy hot in the beginning of June, really abnormally hot. And since then, it's been actually kind of normal here in this part of North Carolina. We've had thunderstorms here and there. It's still a little less than I'd like to have, but thunderstorms here and there. And I've gotten good growth on things. But we were on our way to just disastrous kind of a year of weird stuff happening. So it wouldn't surprise me if you're not getting the growth that you would have gotten other years, regardless of what kind of plant it was. And then I got there's always so many comments from Texas. I think 16% of my views or something are in Texas, which is kind of interesting. I think it's like equal to North Carolina, which is kind of, I need to look that back up again. I might be exaggerating that, but it was over 10% from Texas. All kinds of comments about the 100-degree heat causing problems, and wanted to know if some of their plants were dead or dormant. And I just don't have any way of knowing that. There is a thing called summer dormancy. Lots of plants, when you hit the peak of summer, and we kind of did that there in June for whatever reason, rather than July this year. My peak summer was June. We were having 100-degree days or near 100-degree days, day after day. The plants will go into kind of a stasis and just kind of sit there. But they typically don't turn brown and look dead. That's the extreme of a Texas 105 or 10 versus a 99 and a little humidity here that you may not have. But the only thing you can do on these things is wait. Next spring you'll know. They had a butterfly bush that was looking brown. If it's brown at this point, it may not survive. You may, again, another thing I want to do going forward on this channel is make sure that I'm, telling you, if you're watching my channel, so much of the history of my channel is having you lust after plants that aren't necessarily the best plants for you in your area, in your garden. And I definitely want to, travel to places like Texas or Skidaway Island like I did, this past week, or Chicago like I did 3 weeks ago, and show off what can be done in different types of spaces. You can have beautiful gardens without having to have the water hungry thing, or the sun loving thing, or you can have nice gardens regardless of the type of space you have, or water. You do need water within reason, obviously. But yeah, I want to show more of that. Probably thinking too much while I'm answering that question, but think about going forward, if you're losing things in that Texas heat, to maybe lean on native Texas plants a little more, or South African plants that are not invasive in your area, Mexican plants, California plants, Southwestern plants in general, and you can make a beautiful garden out of that and still use the same techniques of building soil, improving the space, doing all the things we're talking about with a different set of plants. That's all. It's just a different set of puzzle pieces for you, but with the same building blocks holding it together. Okay. So Sim, last question for this week. Somebody said that Tony Avent talked about mixing in compost with everything he plants, and me having said that it's not really necessary to add anything to your soil, and was confused by those two varying statements. I'm improving my soil, and so when I pull back the hardwood mulch and I plant something out here, there's a layer of humus on top of the soil that's getting incorporated into that hole. So I am mixing in compost with the planting hole, but I'm not really doing it on purpose. It's just, that's the way it is. If you've done a lot of soil improvement, you'll be mixing in compost whether you're trying to or not. And so I am mixing in compost, but I do think we've all been way, way, way oversold and this has been my life. I mean, I've planted lots and lots of landscape. I was a landscaper for a long time. I've worked in a high-end garden center where I was told to sell planting mixes and chemicals and mixing cups and backpack sprayers and and slow release fertilizers and sell them this chemical and that chemical, sell them a plant that gets this problem so we can sell them that thing for that problem. I mean, I literally worked in that kind of environment. It wasn't a bad group of people. It's just how you make money, in that type of environment. You sell them lots of things they don't necessarily need. If you look, not a single one of those plants in that wooded space behind me had any help. And it's lush as it can be. And that's the case everywhere in the city, everywhere in the world that you look that's not a landscape. Nobody mixed compost in for those plants. And so I'm telling you, for the most part, it's unnecessary. Now, will that give you the best, most vibrant, full, lush, floriferous, easy word for me to say, plants? No. Soil improvement, and, some organic fertilizer and, the right conditions of sun or shade, those kinds of things all help, with the plants being vigorous and full and lush and beautiful. And that's where that part comes in, where I can sell you lots of things because I can make it better if we put lots of things down. And so that's the tipping point where people can sell you things. And what I'm trying to do is tell you that you don't need to buy any of those things. You can just use your leaves, and you can just use wood chips. You can just use the things that you clip off your own plants, run through a shredder, and you can improve the soil and you can build that humus layer, and then when you plant your plants, a little bit of compost will be added to the holes, and you don't have to have somebody trying to sell you something. So that's the point. Thank you guys for watching, following along. You can ask gardening questions down below, and I'll pick from those for next week's video. Again, thanks for following along with the channel.